The spring of 1996 in Omaha, Nebraska, held a promise of warm breezes and new beginnings, a sentiment perfectly embodied by Sarah Jenkins. 17 years old, with eyes that sparkled with an almost defiant optimism and a laugh that could cut through the dullest of days, Sarah was on the cusp of everything. A senior at Westside High, she was known for her quick wit, her fierce loyalty to her friends, and an insatiable curiosity that hinted at a future far beyond the cornfields of Nebraska. Her room, a sanctuary of posters featuring grunge bands and dog-eared copies of classic novels, reflected a mind both artistic and analytical. She dreamed of attending the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, majoring in journalism, and one day seeing her name in print, telling stories that mattered. Her best friend, Emily Carter, a whirlwind of nervous energy and brightly dyed hair, often joked that Sarah was too smart for Omaha. Sarah would just smile, a quiet acknowledgement of her ambition, but always emphasizing the deep roots she had in her hometown. Her parents, Susan and David Jenkins, were quintessential Midwesterners, hardworking, practical, and deeply loving. David, an accountant, often retreated into his numbers, while Susan, a third-grade teacher, was the emotional anchor of the family. They saw Sarah as their future, a vibrant reflection of their hopes and dreams. The prom, held at the opulent Embassy Suites ballroom on May 11th, was to be Sarah's final, glorious high school memory, a capstone before graduation in the uncharted territories of college life. The air that evening buzzed with anticipation. Sarah had spent weeks poring over dresses with Emily, finally settling on a shimmering, sapphire blue gown that complemented her dark hair and fair skin. Her date was Mark Peterson, a sweet, slightly awkward football player with whom she'd shared a comfortable, if not passionate, relationship since junior year. They took photos in the Jenkins' meticulously manicured backyard, the setting sun casting a golden glow on their youthful faces, a tableau of innocence and joy. Susan fussed over Sarah's hair, a cascade of dark waves held back by a delicate silver clip shaped like a butterfly, a gift from David on her 16th birthday. The flash of the camera captured these moments, freezing them in time, unaware that these images would soon become haunting relics. The prom itself was a blur of dancing, flashing lights, and the booming bass of late 90s pop and R&B. Sarah, radiant and full of life, danced with Mark, laughed with Emily and their circle of friends, and soaked in every moment. Later, like many of their classmates, they headed to an unofficial after-party at a friend's parents' house in a quiet cul-de-sac in the Loveland neighborhood, a sprawling brick ranch typical of the area. The party was lively, music pumping, teenagers milling about, filled with the boundless energy of youth and the heady scent of rebellion. Sarah, always responsible, had promised her parents she'd be home by 2 a.m. Mark, who was driving, confirmed the plan. She called her mother around 1:30 a.m., her voice clear despite the background noise, assuring Susan she was on her way. "See you soon, Mom. Love you," she'd said. It was the last time Susan heard her daughter's voice. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, promising a beautiful day, but for Susan Jenkins, it brought only a creeping dread. Sarah wasn't in her bed. Her prom dress wasn't hung up, her shoes weren't by the door. Initially, Susan tried to rationalize it. Maybe Sarah had stayed over at Emily's, despite her promise. A quick call to Emily's house, however, confirmed the growing fear. Emily had last seen Sarah leave the after-party with Mark around 1:45 a.m., presumably to head home. Mark was still asleep when his mother answered the phone, groggy and confused. He claimed he had dropped Sarah off at the end of her driveway, just as she requested, because she wanted to avoid waking her parents. He saw her walk up to the front door, watched her fumble with her keys, and then drove off. He swore he'd seen her go inside. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Susan. David, usually calm, became agitated. They called the Omaha Police Department. The initial response was cautious, almost dismissive. "Teens run away after prom all the time," the dispatcher said, a weary tone in her voice. "She'll probably show up." But Susan knew Sarah. Her daughter wasn't a runaway. She had her college acceptance letter taped to her mirror. Her beloved cat, Whiskers, was waiting for her. Her dreams were too vivid, too immediate for her to simply vanish. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when Sarah still hadn't appeared and her friends corroborated her responsible nature, that the OPD officially opened a missing persons case. Detectives Robert Miller and Brenda Hayes were assigned. Miller, a seasoned veteran with a world-weary gaze, and Hayes, sharp and meticulous, began their grim work. The first few days were a whirlwind of interviews. Mark Peterson was the primary focus. His story remained consistent. He dropped Sarah off, saw her approach the house. but his demeanor was too calm, almost detached, for someone whose girlfriend had just disappeared. His alibi for the rest of the night checked out. He went straight home. His parents verified he was in by 2 a.m. There were no witnesses who saw anything suspicious after Mark drove away. No car speeding off, no struggling figure, no screams in the quiet suburban street. The Jenkins house showed no signs of forced entry. Sarah's purse, containing her ID and a small amount of cash, was gone. Her house keys were also missing. It was as if she had simply walked out of existence, taking only the essentials. The community of Omaha rallied. Posters bearing Sarah's smiling face, alongside the chilling words "Missing, have you seen Sarah Jenkins?" appeared on every lamppost, storefront window, and telephone pole from the Old Market to West Maple Road. Volunteer search parties combed the vast parks and fields around West Omaha, from Standing Bear Lake to Chalco Hills Recreation Area, their hopes slowly eroding under the relentless sun. Local news channels, KETV and KPTM, ran nightly segments, featuring Susan's tear-streaked pleas and David's stoic but heartbroken appeals. Tips poured in: false sightings, speculative theories, cruel hoaxes, each one sending the Jenkins family on an emotional roller coaster of fleeting hope and crushing disappointment. The investigation hit roadblocks almost immediately. Without a crime scene, without witnesses, without a body, the case was a phantom. Detective Miller grew increasingly frustrated. "It's like she evaporated," he'd mutter during briefings, poring over maps of Omaha, trying to find a pattern, a deviation, anything. Hayes, equally dedicated, delved into Sarah's phone records, her diary, her school computer files, looking for any secret, any troubled relationship, any reason why she might have willingly left or become a target. Sarah was a good kid, perhaps too trusting, but no obvious enemies. There were no strange calls, no suspicious online activity. The internet was still a nascent landscape, not the omnipresent surveillance tool it would later become. The leads dried up one by one. The initial intense media coverage faded, replaced by newer, more urgent stories. Sarah Jenkins became a missing person, then a cold case, a chilling footnote in the city's history. For Susan and David, life became an agonizing exercise in suspended animation. Every ringing phone, every car that slowed down on their street, sparked a surge of adrenaline, only to be replaced by the familiar ache of emptiness. Sarah's bedroom remained untouched, a shrine to a life abruptly interrupted. Her high school diploma arrived in the mail, an ironic symbol of achievement for a life unfulfilled. Birthdays passed, then holidays, each one a stark reminder of her absence. The parents joined support groups, connecting with other families haunted by similar tragedies, finding solace in shared grief but no answers. David grew more withdrawn, lost in his work, while Susan channeled her grief into advocacy, campaigning for missing persons awareness, her once vibrant spirit now tinged with an enduring sadness. The silver butterfly hairclip, the one Sarah wore that night, was found lying on her vanity, as if she had taken it off before leaving, a detail that baffled investigators and tormented her parents. Had she never made it inside? Had she taken it off just before leaving, perhaps to put on a different accessory? The mystery of the missing keys and purse persisted. 8 long years crawled by. 1996 had receded into the past, now 2004. The world had changed dramatically. Cell phones were ubiquitous, the internet a daily necessity, and the fight against terrorism had reshaped global priorities. For the Jenkins family, however, time had stood still, marked only by the escalating emptiness. They had moved from their old house in West Omaha, the memories too painful, too present. They now lived in a smaller home in Elkhorn, a western suburb, a quieter existence, a desperate attempt to outrun the ghost of what was lost. The annual missing persons report still listed Sarah, a faded photograph among thousands. Then, on a crisp autumn morning in October 2004, the silence was shattered. A construction crew, clearing land for a new residential development project near the rural fringes of southwest Omaha, not far from the Platte River, made a disturbing discovery. The site, once a patchwork of overgrown fields and forgotten farm properties, was being prepared for excavation. A bulldozer, scraping away layers of topsoil on a particularly isolated corner of the property, struck something hard, metallic. The operator, an older man named Frank, stopped the machine, his curiosity piqued. He and his foreman climbed down, expecting to find an old piece of farm equipment or buried debris. Instead, partially exposed from the rich, dark soil, was a small, rusted metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox. Frank, with a heavy-duty shovel, carefully dug around it, trying not to damage whatever was inside. The box was sealed crudely with what looked like several wraps of thick, decaying duct tape. A sense of unease settled over them. They called their supervisor, who, seeing the unnerving nature of the discovery, immediately contacted the OPD. Within an hour, the quiet construction site was swarming with patrol cars, forensic vans, and once again, the familiar faces of Detective Miller and Sergeant Hayes. She had been promoted in the intervening years. The scene was quickly cordoned off. The box was carefully extracted and transported to the crime lab. Its contents were a jolt from the past, chilling and undeniable. Inside the corroded metal shell, protected by several layers of plastic sheeting, were 3 items. The first was a small, tarnished silver locket, engraved with the initials S.J. on one side and a delicate daisy on the other. The second, nestled beside it, was the very same silver butterfly hair clip Sarah Jenkins had worn to her prom, the one her parents believed was left on her vanity. And the third item, tucked beneath the locket, was Sarah's Westside High School ID card, her youthful face smiling out from the laminated plastic, dated 1996. The implications were immediate and devastating. Sarah Jenkins was not a runaway. She had not simply vanished. Something terrible had happened to her, and these items were a direct, undeniable link to that fateful night. The discovery brought a fresh wave of grief to Susan and David, but also a raw, desperate flicker of hope. 8 years of silence, of agonizing uncertainty, had finally been broken. The case was no longer cold. It was ablaze with renewed urgency. Detectives Miller and Hayes, their faces etched with the weight of the years, revisited every aspect of the original investigation. The discovery location was meticulously processed, but the soil had been disturbed too much by the bulldozer to yield any further immediate clues. However, the items themselves offered new forensic possibilities thanks to advances in technology. DNA testing, far more sophisticated in 2004 than in 1996, was immediately ordered on the box, the plastic, and the items inside. Investigators returned to Mark Peterson, his alibi, his demeanor, now scrutinized with renewed suspicion. Other classmates, forgotten acquaintances, even teachers, were re-interviewed, their memories now sifted through the lens of a confirmed tragedy. The discovery sent shockwaves through Omaha. The local news channels, after an initial flurry of reporting, began to air retrospectives on Sarah's disappearance, comparing the grainy images from 1996 with the stark reality of the present. The renewed focus stirred up old fears, old suspicions. The question was no longer where is Sarah, but what happened to Sarah and who is responsible. The butterfly clip, the locket, the ID, these weren't just objects. They were fragments of a life, buried and then unearthed, screaming a silent testimony from the grave. The Jenkins family, battered by years of sorrow, now braced themselves for the harrowing journey towards an answer, a truth that might bring closure but would never fully heal the wound left by the night Sarah vanished after prom. The discovery was a violent awakening, forcing Omaha to confront a ghost it had long tried to forget, a story that was far from over, a promise of justice hanging precariously in the Nebraska air. The box contained not just Sarah's personal effects, but a renewed, desperate plea for her story to finally be told, for her fate to finally be revealed. The relentless pursuit of truth had begun anew, a race against time, memory, and the grim secrets held by the land. The total character count is 21,677.